Hey, Doug and Pat here with another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners. And today we're going to talk about pricing, how to price right and increase prices for clients. So, Doug, let's get to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a common problem that we got to have a plan to navigate because like many of us, myself included, we when we first start, we price really low. Maybe that's due to confidence, maybe that's due to just doing what the guy or gal down the street is priced at, culmination of things. But what ends up happening, of course, is as your client base grows, your revenue doesn't quite grow as much as you thought it was going to grow, and you run into margin issues. So, I mean, I think it's first realizing that the pricing is certainly a big bottleneck that we have to overcome.
Well, I think a lot of people get into business ownership and they don't really think a lot about margins. They think about just gross revenue and kind of assume that there will be profit mixed in there. So, they don't really have a great sense of, okay, what does good pricing look like? Because they'll see these other businesses that might be in higher profile areas. They see them priced maybe more conservatively, and they'll think, well, either, hey, I've got to match that and they seem to be doing well, or maybe I need to be a little bit less than that to come in and capture some market share. So yeah, I mean, I think it's normal and it's not a surprise that this isn't something that a lot of owners have a handle on. So where do we go to fix it?
All right, so I think there's two angles we can go with this. The first one is what do you do for pricing going forward? Because that's the easier fix, certainly. All of us could change our pricing today, put out a new price sheet for new people going forward, and it's not going to disrupt things too much. The second angle we can hit on would be, of course, the bigger challenge, which is the current clients increase. But just making sure we're profitably priced from the get-go. I think, some rules of thumbs that I like to share with our clients would be making sure we generate at least 200-ish per training hour. So you can kind of work your way into that based upon the model you run. So for example, if you are running small group personal training, you're doing a 6-to-1 ratio, you want to be at least in that 35 to $45 per session per client range. Because when you mathematically multiply that out, now you multiply that times your 5 or 6 client cap, you're at least hitting that 200 plus dollars, $250 per hour. Now, that doesn't mean you charge per hour or charge per session. You can obviously bundle that into memberships, which we can certainly break down as well. But I think hitting that $200 per session threshold is a good starting point for people. And at first, that can kind of feel high if you've come from the solopreneur model where maybe you're just charging for a private training session, or you're doing couples training and all the money is going to you. The reality is we need to price our services in a way that take into account certainly the pay for the person delivering the session. And ideally we're building a business where maybe you want to, but you don't have to do the training session. So of course you have payroll that goes into that. You have your overhead expenses that go into that. You have things like taxes that go into that. So when we factor all of that in, that is why typically for brick and mortar facilities, the 200 to 250 per training session seems to be, at least as of today, a healthy starting point to then reverse down and say, I need to be charging about X per session.
So, all right, so they can kind of math it out and understand that, okay, I'm gonna hopefully see 5 to 6 people a session. I need to be in that 35 to $45 range. Like, what does that look like if we're reverse engineering that and making it a membership for an individual person?
Yeah. So the membership model that we recommend is certainly 2 or 3 membership options. More than that tends to be unnecessary and overwhelming. Obviously, you want to have 2 to 3 options so that if somebody is not appropriate for one, you can up or downsell them to another option. So what that may look like in practicality would be something like a 4 time, 8 time, and 12 time, or 4 session, 8 session, 12 session. So for example, if you're charging, say, 40, low 40s per session, somebody might sign up for your, like we call ours, the essentials, which is just your kind of base 4 times per cycle. So that would come out to, 169 per bill cycle. Our mid-level option might be the 8 time per bill cycle. And so now you're in that like mid 300s range per bill cycle. And you'll notice that I use the term cycle because I do recommend for brick and mortar folks, the majority of our clients have moved to billing every 4 weeks, and they do their programming every 4 weeks. So it works. Yes, there's the financial reason of billing every 4 weeks gets you a 13th bill cycle. Like there's no denying that. That being said, it does also match things like if you do your program design and your training in training blocks, in 4-week blocks. Now your billing matches that, so they're being billed every 4 weeks. Also, from a visit standpoint, most of these models, especially in the small group and semi-private model, we're selling kind of X number of times per week, right? So twice a week or 3 times a week. And so in that case, when you have kind of funky months, you don't have to worry about odd amount of sessions. So it works really well to say, hey, you're going to get 8 sessions per bill cycle. We bill every 4 weeks. That's about twice a week. That is twice a week. However, if you're gone for a week and you want to show up 3 times that week to make up the session, you can make it up within the bill cycle. So either way, that mid option is what most people are going to buy. And so for small group, that typically in most markets lands in the mid 300s per bill cycle. For semi-private, we tend to be up closer to the mid 400s to 500. But using that session math to then multiply out how many am I going to get and bucketing that into the 3 tiers.
So, there are a couple observations I know I have with this. Number one just kind of runs alongside this. I think sometimes we get timid about pricing and that $300 mark or whatever else, and it's interesting. We both talk to a lot of gym owners that how people arrive at kind of a number. They're afraid to push, and they don't even think about, okay, is this actually a me obstacle, or is this a client obstacle? I mean, I can talk with somebody who says, hey, we're 259 a month. Well, I mean, there's probably not too many people out there who are apprehensive to pay 279 or 299 that are currently paying 259. So just understand that we're the ones who've kind of set those limits a lot of times, not the market, not any evidence that somebody doesn't value what we do at a higher price than this. The other thing about it, I mean, this is a good starting point, but if somebody's got 5 one-on-one clients going at a time, I mean, really, I think this math works pretty darn well in any leveraged model where it probably you need to make perhaps more per is if you're somebody who's got a studio with 6 one-on-one sessions going on at a time or whatever else. I mean, obviously there's a different sort of equation that you need to arrive at. So, but hopefully those are a couple things to augment all that you've unpacked here.
Yeah, the only other things I would add to that, just as you build out your new pricing, and then we can shift to how to handle current clients, is depending upon what stat you read, it's somewhere between 3 and 5% of the household income that somebody will spend on their health and fitness. And so certainly, you can use that as a very broad kind of number to say, in the training gym world, most of our household incomes are north of 6 figures. And so, they're comfortably able to spend $3,000 to $4,000 a year towards their fitness. Now, for somebody who's a early stage gym owner, they're not taking a paycheck and they're struggling from a mindset perspective to even pay the bills. It can be really hard to understand why somebody would pay $300 to $400 per month or per cycle for something. And so I think it's important to understand, like they're not good at what we're delivering. If they were good at it, they would be doing it on their own. So they're in some type of physical pain, emotional pain, something like that they're trying to overcome. And so they're willing to pay for help, just like I'm not a plumber. So if my Water heater breaks, I'm going to call a plumber, even though it's going to cost me $150 an hour. I don't know how to do that and I need hot water. So I'm going to call the plumber. Right. And so there's kind of that piece of it. And then, of course, there's the financial piece of it. Like most of our avatars are in very different financial positions than we often are. And that can be a mindset hurdle to overcome. Certainly as you do more of it, that builds confidence. But just understanding that, I think I remember I struggled with that as a young gym owner when you're selling to somebody who's, 3 times your age and making 5 times as much as you. It's certainly a hurdle that needs to overcome.
I mean, that was the aha moment for me selling. I had a conversation with a client who just broke it down to percentage of their income they were making. And, at the time I was making under $40,000 a year. And it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. And that helped a lot. So yeah, I mean, the selling stuff, a lot of times we get in our own way when it comes to pricing. And it's understandable, but it's not an anchor that we have to stay attached to in perpetuity. So, all right. So if we've got the pricing where we want it, let's talk about how to introduce price adjustments to our current clients.
Yeah. So, a mistake that I made is didn't change pricing for current clients for I think we might have hit a decade, if not, 8 or 9 years. And that, creates as many of you know, a pretty significant hole that you have to always try to climb out of. And the reality is, I think I had many years of trying to push a square peg into a round hole and realize that you can't outsell that. So, there's a term we use in this industry a lot now, which is the ARM, average revenue per member. And all that is taking your revenue and dividing it by how many clients you have. And that tells you what your average client is paying. And that's always a nice number to pay attention to, at least on a monthly basis. It's not something you need to look at on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. But if you're looking at it on a monthly basis, and let's say that your current pricing for new people is, use that mid 300s range, but your ARM is only 200 or 250, well, that's $100 gap. And, you can use nowadays, I did a spreadsheet, but nowadays you could use AI to calculate how many clients am I going to have to add, new people at the price point, to get my average up above 300. And you'll see very quickly that it's a lot. And it's really hard to outsell that. So the short answer is, we do need to do annual price increases to current clients. And I think there's kind of 2 different ways to go about it. There's the smaller adjustment, which I would consider to be a single-digit percentage increase, somewhere between 5 and 10% increase every 6 to 12 months to kind of slowly get them up. And that's the less painful way. It's certainly, if the gap is not too big, it's certainly maybe the more recommended or common practice, where once or twice a year you send out an email and letting them know that the prices increase. I always encourage clients to do a couple things with that communication. One is remind them what you've kind of done and invested in and how things have improved. 2 is to remind them that they're still paying less than new people. They're still receiving kind of loyalty pricing. And the third thing would be to break it down per session of what the increase is going to be. So it's a lot more palatable to read that your price is increasing $2 a session than it is to say it's increasing $30 a month. So just thinking of the price increase that way seems to make it, you're going to have the 5% that squawk no matter what. But if you go with a marginal increase like that, you tend not to have a big churn.
Yeah. And one way that I've found that you can kind of get out of your own way with this is, hey, if my clients are currently paying $35 a session, would they have signed up at 38? Probably, right? So, we just arbitrarily picked 35 as that number. And so if they would have signed up at that point, then you probably don't have a whole lot to be worried about. And the reality is, you're probably at a point where I know everybody worries that they're just going to make this mass exodus here, right? And there's going to be a parade going out the door to the competitor. But, at some level, there's a pain of change regardless, right? So is it worth $2 more a session to have all the things that I like, that I value, that I'm comfortable with, the relationships, the connections with the coaches? Or am I willing to go somewhere else and try to save $2 a session to throw all of that up into upheaval and hope I can find something even remotely comparable? Well, I mean, we know how most of us operate, and I think that almost in every case that we would invest a little bit more to keep all the things that we really like.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. That pain of change is a real thing for sure. And the from a kind of ease of anxiety standpoint, I know a lot of exercises that our gym owners do is they'll look at and say, okay, how many people could leave and I'll still actually make the same, if not more money, right? And you realize it's a pretty hefty amount of people that would need to leave for you to actually go down in revenue. And usually, again, we're not sitting here promising nobody's going to leave, but it's usually like you can count it on one hand is the number of people that leave from a price increase. And that far outweighs the margin that you're going to be making on the increase. And I think having done it the other way, I would very much recommend a kind of almost at this point guaranteed annual price increase. And it just is kind of par for the course for you to increase your prices every year for across the board, new people and current people, knowing that the current people are always going to be paying less than what your current prices are. Because if we take away anything with pricing, it's that the common problem as a gym owner grows is they get consistent with their marketing, demand increases, and supply, which would be the amount of sessions we have, gets a little bit tighter. And so there's only two ways to overcome that, which is you add more sessions, which requires payroll, or you charge more. And so, usually it's a combination of both, but we can't kind of outwork the low pricing, and we have to get that up to an appropriate spot where we're actually making margin from this business.
Yeah, I mean, the world doesn't get less expensive, right? So we're losing ground if we don't adjust pricing to match the way that everything else in the world operates, right? We're spending more on the things that we're investing in. Our clients are familiar with all this in their world too. So yeah, so I mean, typically, what have you found best? An email, a snail mail letter? What's your preferred approach?
So we used to do and teach a snail mail approach, which I think depending upon how much you want to, some of this is like what makes you sleep at night better with this, right? For me, I thought it was very powerful to, type up a letter, print out copies, have the team sign the bottom of the letter and put it in the mail. I would say that's like nowadays probably unnecessary, but if it helps you sleep at night and it takes you an hour to type up the letter and print it out and sign it, it doesn't hurt to get that in the mail. Most of our clients at this point, myself included, are just sending an email giving the clients a reason why, certainly thanking them for their legacy, showing them that they're not paying as much as new people, breaking it down per session, and then letting them know when it's taking effect, usually around that 30-day notice mark. So they're, not caught off guard with a week's notice or anything like that. So an email tends to suffice nowadays, especially in our models where they're not getting a letter from some no-name brand, right? They can reply to that email. They know the reply is usually going to go to you. You know that you can customer service it. And I think, that tends to be enough, and you don't have to snail mail it if you don't want to.
Well, and you also have a pretty good handle on who's actually opened the email. You can see open rates. You can make sure that resend to non-opens as needed and make sure that everybody's gotten it. So that should also give you a little bit of peace of mind as well. So any final words or thoughts when it comes to profitable pricing?
No, I think we covered it all. I mean, certainly get your current price or your current pricing first, nail that down because that's the easier change. But don't delay the current clients and getting them up to par because that is a big hill to overcome. And I think you'll be happy once you're on the other side of it.
All right. Well, there's profitable pricing, and that's Doug and Pat with another episode of The Wealthy Gym Owners. Talk to you soon.